The story begins by introducing us to our leading lady, known for her knack for trickery, as she undergoes an interrogation while en route to a notorious criminal haven. The interrogator questions her based on the reports he possesses, which caution against being tricked by her words due to her silver tongue and mad skills in the art of trickery and dispute resolution. They say she's the full package, persuasive, brainy, and one eloquent talker. The interrogation unfolds aboard a ship bound for Monty Island's Lake Vise. It continues, and the interrogator seeks to ascertain her identity by asking her name. Instead of offering a straightforward response, she counters with a question of her own, inquiring why he's so keen on knowing her name. She goes on to assert that there isn't a single individual unfamiliar with her name. Seems like our protagonist is quite popular. The man, however, insists that her telling her name is standard procedure. Reluctantly, she finally reveals her name as Rosen Walker, but this name contradicts the one documented. She maintains that Rosen Walker is her authentic name, but the interrogator displays no interest in her true identity. Instead, he simply wants her to confirm the name recorded in the documents. In response, she eventually yields, confirming the name Rosen Howards, which aligns with the information in the papers. We learn that at just 17, she was sentenced to 50 years in prison, specifically the Perney Women's Prison. However, she managed to escape just a year later. She bravely climbed down the hill, crossed the rugged Togue Mountains barefoot, and was eventually arrested 3 months later as a fugitive in St. Bonnes. The result of this was an additional 25 years in prison and a transfer to the highly secured Al-Khaifez prison. Remarkably, she managed to escape from Al-Khaifez prison as well, just 5 years later. It's also worth noting that she successfully evaded capture by the Imperial Army for a year. The most intriguing part of all of this is that the Al-Khaifez prison claimed that she had escaped by digging a hole with only a spoon. With all these fascinating details about Rosen Walker, the interviewer inquires about the truthfulness of these stories, and she expressly confirms it. She even attempts to engage him in a conversation about how she acquired the spoon she used for her daring escape. However, he sternly warns her not to provide irrelevant information and to answer only the questions asked. Finally, this mysterious interviewer is revealed to be none other than Ian Kerner. He's a famous war hero, and his face was a familiar sight during the war. His voice? It's like a siren call in the skies, leading folks through the war's darkest hours. Everyone leaned on him like he was the last slice of pizza at a party. Ian then goes on to inform her about the reason she's being sent all the way to Monty Island, known as the worst prison on Earth. It's because she managed to escape from prison twice, and it utterly crushed the pride of the Imperial Army. Curiously, he presses her for the details of her imprisonment, but she remains steadfast in asserting her innocence. He casually points out that it's rare for a prisoner to admit to a crime honestly, but her insistence on innocence doesn't change the fact that she was convicted. However, this doesn't stop her from saying again that she's innocent. Ian Kerner, in response, warns her against engaging in any form of argument and urges her to provide honest answers. As they continue their conversation, a young man abruptly bursts into the room, inquiring about Ian Kerner's activities. Ian explains that he is conducting an interview with the prisoner as it is standard procedure for the transport officer to identify the prisoner. He emphasizes that this particular prisoner deserves their utmost attention. However, the young man insists that Ian should not be involved in such work, especially since those sent to Monty Island are the most severe offenders. During their conversation, he suddenly recognizes Rosen Walker as the infamous Witch of Al-Khaifez and is curious about why Ian must interview such a dangerous prisoner. He remarks that one should not be careless, even if she appears fragile, as she is the one who escaped from the Al-Khaifez prison. The man then queries Ian Kerner about the information he presented concerning Rosen Walker's case, alleging that she ended her husband's life. Rosen quickly interjects, vehemently denying the accusation with an innocence that could rival a cherubic angel. She claims she was a devoted wife who loved her husband and insists it was a robbery, as many people were jealous of her husband, Hindley Howards. She questions why they didn't conduct a proper investigation and instead put her in jail without considering her account. In response, Ian Kerner nonchalantly advises her to stop her acting, emphasizing that her past as a wife does not alter her guilty verdict. Trying to persuade him, she questions how she could have taken her husband's life with her slim body. To her surprise, he responds that no one expected her to escape from Parents Women's Prison and Al-Khaifez, yet she did. He also points out that her small frame does not make it impossible, and if the evidence points to her, she is the culprit, period. He then instructs Henry to escort the prisoner, and he exits the room. Now, Rosen's sitting there, thinking about how Ian Kerner's actually a lot nicer than the other guards. Normally, she might have escaped by now, but the way things are going with this cat-and-mouse game between her and the guard, it's no cakewalk. She realizes she has to stay sharp because one slip-up could cost her a chance to break free. But she's pretty confident in her escape skills, just like she's pulled it off before. And through all this thinking, she's got her eyes locked on those keys hanging from Ian Kerner's waist. As they make their way out of the room, Henry asks whether Kerner plans to give Rosen a tour of the guests, to which the commander responds that everyone who boarded the Vise intended to explore the transformed prison ship, so he thought it would be an exciting experience. In the aftermath of the war, significant changes have occurred. Steamships once utilized for military purposes have undergone a transformation, including the Vise ship. This vessel, once occupied by the strong scent of gunpowder smoke, the echoes of gunshots, and the presence of wounded soldiers, has been rapidly converted into a venue for vibrant, colorfully decorated parties accompanied by upbeat music. The ship's destination has shifted from a site of conflict to the serene Monty Island. Ironically, this peaceful-sounding locale is where prisoners are now abandoned to meet their demise. Henry compares himself and the commander to Rosen, saying that they weren't any different on the battlefield because, while they were busy trying to save lives, Rosen took her husband's life. He even claims that she should be thankful she wasn't hanged on the spot because she escaped twice, wasting both manpower and taxes. However, the prisoner cautions him for being too noisy. Just then, Kerner turns to Henry, advising him not to waste his emotions on unnecessary things, and he even apologizes to Rosen for his subordinate's rudeness. Henry immediately tells his superior not to let his guard down because this prisoner might be a witch. As they continue to make their way out, the commander leads her to the balcony, claiming that he has something to show Rosen. As she stares at the view, which she finds beautiful, she thinks to herself that she never thought she'd be able to see a sight like this in her lifetime. Commander Kerner then shares a rumor he heard with her, which is that she escaped Al-Khaifez by digging a hole. Out of curiosity, he asks her if she really did go down the cliff naked, leaving her with no idea of the kind of answer to give him. Then he mentions that people say she used magic to escape previously, and of course, she's surprised by this revelation. Apparently, the last person who succeeded in escaping Al-Khaifez 36 years ago was a witch, and that's why when Rosen's jailbreak was first reported in the media, people were convinced that she too was a witch. So, she asks him if she would live this way if she were a witch, also asserting that she wouldn't even have been caught in the first place. She goes on to say that if she were a witch, she wouldn't have left her hands shackled in such a manner. Besides, it wouldn't make sense for her to be on the boat with tourists. However, Henry doesn't seem convinced after hearing all this from her. He advises Kerner not to believe her, stating that she is known to lie whenever she opens her mouth. He points out that it is written in the datasheet that she lies a lot and almost fooled the entire nation by pretending to be innocent and wept throughout the first trial. Visibly annoyed by Henry's words, Rosen turns to him and assures him that he's very lucky because if she really were a witch, she would have sealed his lips sooner. She explains that she has already passed the magic discrimination test, so it should be enough to convince him. She even goes as far as asking him if it means that a soldier of the country doesn't possess enough intelligence to grasp all she has been saying. Henry furiously tries to caution her, but the commander stops him. Ian Kerner calls out Henry's name, instructing him to take his hands off the prisoner. He also tells him that if he can't control his emotions and runs wild one more time, he'll report him to upper management. Kerner calls out Rosen's name, referring to her as the infamous escapee in the Empire and the Witch of Al-Kafez. He says it doesn't matter whether she's a liar, telling the truth, or a witch, he only wants to remind her of a few obvious facts. He begins by reminding her that she is a convicted prisoner sentenced to life imprisonment in Monty Island prison. Secondly, he was ordered to take her to Monty Island. Thirdly, although Al-Kafez has had several escapes so far, none of them have managed to flee from Monty Island, and no one can, even if the person is a witch. Upon hearing this, she takes note of the fact that he's unkindly trampling on her. She contemplates whether there's a lifeboat or a handcuff key hidden somewhere nearby and realizes that if she intends to escape, she must do so before they arrive at the island. While they are still there, Henry returns and informs Kerner that he has brought what he ordered. So, he takes the tray of meat from Henry. Rosen sees the meat and feels relieved, assuming it is for her, but little does she know that it's merely a tool to test the sea's voracious appetite. The commander tosses the meat into the sea and tells her that if she desires to become a monster snack, she can take a lifeboat and embark on a new adventure. He lifts the bunch of keys tied to his waist, suggesting that she might want them, but also subtly advising her to reconsider immediately. From all he has just shown her, she realizes he's not a gentleman, and she remarks that a guard can't be a gentleman. As she returns to her cell, the other inmate inside asks about Ian Kerner and what he said during the interview. She replies, saying he told her not to think about escaping, but the lady appears to want to know more conversation about Commander Ian Kerner. The lady, who we now know as Maria, continues to persist in trying to persuade Rosen for more information about her time with the commander. She attempts to convince Rosen to develop a closer connection with him to facilitate their escape, even though Rosen believes that the commander may not be the sole issue at hand. As Rosen gives them the details, we learn that Maria of Al-Kafez was a prisoner who deserved the tag Witch of Al-Kafez than our protagonist did. Rosen explains that when she was transferred to Al-Kafez, Maria was already a well-known prisoner who had previously managed to escape. However, after she caught Maria's attention, the other inmates accepted her as their leader, making her prison life remarkably smoother. She remembers how Maria desperately yearned for her own victory, as if her sole aim was to crush the pride of the Imperial Army and vanish. Returning to their ongoing conversation about the commander, Rosen promises Maria that she will never give up and assures her that they will find a way to escape. Subsequently, Maria hands Rosen a cigarette and initiates a conversation with her about the commander and his job as a pilot. As they delve into their discussion, Rosen questions why the commander is working in this capacity since it doesn't align with typical Air Force duties. Then, Maria hints that it might be due to an injury the commander sustained, though Rosen recalls him appearing physically normal during their prior interactions. They continue pondering ways to gain the commander's attention, even though Rosen is at a loss regarding her own escape this time around. Lost in thought, Rosen reflects that even if they manage to acquire the key, attempting to cross the treacherous sea in a lifeboat without a thruster engine would be a nearly impossible mission. She considers that escape seems unattainable, and even if she were to succeed, she sees herself succumbing to starvation in the middle of the ocean. As she is deeply engrossed in these miserable thoughts, a sudden, loud noise disrupts her contemplations. As she prepares to shout in response to the disturbance, she realizes it's caused by a small child. Surprised about how the child ended up there, Rosen approaches her and inquires about her parents. She advises the child to leave, as it's unsafe for her to be alone. Instead of heeding the advice, the child moves closer and introduces herself as Layla Leeville, the same surname as Henry's. Rosen recognizes the name and asks the little girl if she's related to Henry, and the child replies affirmatively, stating that he's her uncle, and she asks Rosen if she knows him and if she's her uncle's friend. Rosen still insists to the child that she shouldn't be here, because this isn't a playground for children. Before long, the child's eyes well up with tears as she explains that she had already promised her friends that if she came down here, she'd be able to meet Rosen Walker. She reveals that the person she came hoping to see is the most famous escapee in the Empire, the Witch of Al-Kafez, and there were rumors that she was on this boat. Furthermore, she claims she can see her because her grandfather is the captain, though others don't believe her. Stunned by the little child's story, Rosen congratulates Layla for finding her and introduces herself as the well-known Rosen Walker. Meanwhile, Henry and Ian remain on the balcony. Henry complains of having a headache, and the commander suggests that he think of this moment as a break. He informs Henry that the ship is charting a course towards Monty Island and will turn back. The commander also mentions that the scenery is so beautiful that people pay money to sightsee, but Henry interjects, saying it should be more isolated. They continue their discussion, exchanging teasing remarks. As the ship continues to sail, Henry recalls that the Witch of Al-Kafez mentioned she is from Rierton. This news about Rosen's origin came as a shock to the commander. So, Henry takes a moment to reassure him, telling him that he doesn't have to worry too much about it. Henry mentions once again that Rosen's Walker is originally from Rierton, and it appears that she may have committed a crime while living on the outskirts of the city. The commander acknowledges that he is aware of this fact, but Henry explains that he knows Commander Kerner is aware, and that's precisely why he shared all the information he did. He also speculates that her origin might be related to the reason his superior, Kerner, cares about her, noting that he even conducted a separate questioning for her. Commander Ian Kerner then reveals that Rierton was his childhood hometown, where he spent his formative years attending the military academy. It's also the place where he had his first experience flying an aircraft and where he witnessed the city being devastated by a blast during the war. Henry points out that Rosen seems to be an annoyingly lucky individual since she managed to escape death by leaving the city. However, his colleague disagrees, maintaining that she's a death-sentenced prisoner. Henry adds that, on a different note, he's on his way to Monty Island with Sir Connor's escort to become famous potentially, and the commander gives him a knowing look and confirms that it is, indeed, Monty Island. Meanwhile, Rosen and Layla engage in a prolonged discussion while the little child is utterly surprised to have finally met Rosen Walker in such a manner. The child eagerly inquires whether everything she read in the newspaper is indeed accurate and if she genuinely dug a cave with a spoon. Rosen wholeheartedly affirms, soothing the child's curiosity. Sensing the child's burning desire to know if she possesses magical abilities, Rosen seizes the opportunity and proposes a deal. She offers to showcase her magic in return if the child answers all her questions. In response, Layla hesitates, mentioning her grandfather's warnings about not granting wishes to prisoners. However, she ultimately manages to persuade the curious little girl to grant her request. Throughout their engaging conversation, Maria simply sits there, quietly observing them while puffing on her cigarette. Rosen proceeds to reveal that her question is not a difficult one but merely a matter of curiosity. She initiates her inquiry by asking Layla if she is acquainted with Commander Ian Kerner. Layla, with innocence in her eyes, responds, describing him as her uncle's boss, a war hero, and the finest pilot. She continues her line of questioning by delving into the commander's romantic life, leaving the little girl perplexed about the purpose of these probing inquiries. As if her previous questions were not enough, Rosen proceeds to ask Layla if Commander Kerner is an affectionate person, leaving Layla somewhat confused by the term affectionate. At this point, Maria intervenes, explaining to Layla the meaning of affectionate and even offering illustrative examples. The perceptive little child quickly identifies these instances as expressions of love, and she relays to Rosen that, from her perspective, the commander does not appear to have someone he loves romantically. Still, she believes him to be a good person nonetheless. After Layla had answered all her questions, it was time to fulfill the promise of showing her the magic. She decides to perform a trick involving a coin, assuring the child that the coin will transform into gold at sunset. Rosen also emphasizes the importance of keeping the magic a secret, warning the child not to mention it to anyone, as that could cause the magic to vanish. Later that day, Maria approaches Rosen and inquires if she indeed possesses magical abilities based on what she had witnessed during the earlier coin trick. To Maria's surprise, Rosen disclosed that it was nothing more than a simple craft of hand trick. Maria confronts her about this revelation, pointing out the consistency with Rosen's earlier claims of never being able to lie, despite the evident deception involved in the magic trick. Their argument escalates, revolving around Rosen's alleged witchcraft and their ongoing plans to escape from their current situation. After their conversation, Maria confides in Rosen, expressing her uncertainty about the story's authenticity. She shares that there are rumors of witches who escaped the world and found refuge in a mysterious haven known as the Island of Witches. In response, Rosen mentions that she's heard whispers suggesting the island is not far from Monty Island, and these witches have managed to blend in with the local masses. She adds that accessing the island is definitely going to be a huge challenge, emphasizing that it's called the Island of Witches for a purpose. Later, Maria inquires whether disguising themselves as tragic individuals will be effective when dealing with the innocent child, Layla. She also hopes that Rosen will employ this strategy with the commander. Maria then reclines silently, her thoughts turning inward as she reflects that she gets sympathy by associating herself with the hero, which has proven beneficial. Nevertheless, she acknowledges that the shallow tricks that have worked on others thus far will likely fail when it comes to Commander Ian Kerner. She further observes that he embodies a unique combination of roles: soldier, pilot, and hero, a stark contrast to her own character. While Henry and Kerner are still out on the balcony, a memory from the past flashes through our commander's mind. However, he soon snaps out of his thoughts as Henry suggests they return inside since they've been outside for a long time. As they walk in, Henry expresses his disbelief that the war hero has to escort the Witch of Al-Kafez. Kerner replies by saying they had no choice, because a soldier must follow orders. They continue to discuss the Kerner's position for a while, before Henry advises him to take a break and live comfortably after the matter ends. He also asks if there's only a road of uncertainty left before him. This question makes the commander reflect on what happened after the war. He finally realizes that when he passed the Arc de Triomphe while in uniform, everyone who had gathered, like clouds, shouted the same name. They held flower baskets and sprinkled colorful flower petals. Kerner begins to question himself. Was he really happy standing in front of that sight? Did his heart really feel breathless? He even wonders what kind of expression he wore while passing through the Arc de Triomphe. Noticing the sour mood of the commander, Henry tries to lift his spirits by telling him that he can't protect everyone and there can't always be a perfect victory because he is not a god. Moreover, everyone knows that a commander must make cruel choices at times. Aside from that, he urges Kerner not to dwell on Rosen Walker. Henry also tells him that he doesn't have to go through it alone, but then, in typical male lead fashion, Kerner insists that he'll handle everything himself and that Henry should focus on his recovery. While sitting alone, Kerner begins to reflect on the moment he received the order to escort the prisoners to Monty Island with specific instructions regarding Rosen Walker. As he remains deep in thoughts, the infamous Rosen Walker walks into the room and inquires why he summoned her without any prior explanation. Turns out she had been present in the room all along, but he hadn't noticed her presence due to his preoccupation with his thoughts. Rosen's question interrupts his thoughts, causing him to snap back to reality. He decides to continue by discussing the shark stock, aiming to dissuade her from any thoughts of escape. However, she flares up, clearly comprehending the direction of his words. So, she challenges him, questioning whether he's implying that contemplating an escape is a foolish notion. In response, Kerner tells her that the difference between a fool and a hero is as thin as a sheet of paper, and he doesn't believe either of them falls on the worst side of that line. Furthermore, he adds that if she begins to overthink, she might lack the courage to act at all. He then acknowledges her bravery and speculates whether some people see her as a kind of dark hero. In turn, she inquires if he considers her a fool or a hero, and then he offers his assessment, deeming her a fool jailbreaker by his standards, urging her not to resort to violence. The back-and-forth questioning continues, and Rosen observes what she has learned over the past 2 days. She realizes that Commander Kerner responds more favorably when she doesn't cry or act pitiful, and he shows no interest when she speaks nonsense. After a while, the questioning session finally ends, and it's time to leave the room. But Rosen knows she can't leave the room now. If she departs now, the entire process will be repeated, and she might miss her chance to pursue her hidden agenda. For her, this is the only opportunity to get the commander's attention by speaking nonsense. So just as Kerner is on the verge of opening the door, she makes a bold statement. She declares that just like her, he's a fool as well. Startled by this unexpected statement, he asks her to elaborate on what she means, and she proceeds to explain his earlier comment about the paper-thin distinction between a hero and a fool. She suggests that he is the sun hero, and she is the dark hero, and both are fools because, in the heat of war, they only contemplate victory. She then boldly asks why a renowned war hero, like him, is escorting a humble prisoner. It seems like her plan worked, because our dear commander is obviously annoyed by her words. He raises his voice, yelling at her to keep her mouth shut. Noticing that her words are finally getting to him, she continues to speak, driven by a desire to provoke him to the point where he might resort to violence. She's mentally prepared to endure whatever comes her way, as she's no stranger to pain. To her surprise, he finally responds, his voice firm and determined. He tells her that she has spoken far too freely, given the sacrifices made by countless comrades who lost their lives or were injured defending their homeland in the skies. He emphasizes that history may not remember them, but they willingly gave their young lives to protect the Empire's people. He acknowledges that people like her, Rosen, who only know how to flee, may not fully appreciate the sacrifices made, but she shouldn't have insulted them. The commander suggests that he believes she's intentionally trying to provoke him and get his attention, so he advises her to cease her games, as her attempts to provoke him and her deceit are too shallow to fool him. Furthermore, he informs her that if she seeks sympathy, she should look elsewhere, leaving her to wonder if he's the same person who was just angry. He decides to reveal a piece of information, explaining that there's no practical need to physically chain her wrists and feet on the ship. However, he states that the reason she has to wear these symbolic chains is to bear the weight of her sin, the sin of taking a person's life. Just as she attempts to say more hurtful things to provoke him, he interrupts her, expressing his full understanding of the kind of person she is. With no further room for questioning, he instructs her to return. Rosen emerges from the room, a look of annoyance spread across her face. She can't help but wonder whether the commander believes she'll remain frustrated, given everything he said to her. As she stands just outside the room where the questioning occurred, Henry appears, ready to escort her back to her cell. However, he immediately detects a change in her behavior and can't resist asking her what's going on. Henry notices that she's braided her hair and washed her face, even remarking that if she had some lipstick, she might have added a touch of color to her lips as well. Intrigued by her transformation, he can't help but inquire about the nature of her latest tricks. Rosen replies with a mischievous smile, informing him that she washed her face like a human being, using the drinking water she managed to save. Still somewhat skeptical, Henry remains convinced that she's playing a game of pretense, so he tells her that no matter what her trick is, it won't be enough to change the outcome. Unbothered, she leans in and slyly asks him if he has any idea what kind of trick she's planning. Her teasing tone suggests that she's enjoying the cat-and-mouse game. In response to her flirtatious inquiry, Henry remains firm in his determination not to engage in conversation. He insists they should maintain silence and continue walking swiftly. As they walk by, Rosen's eyes meet Layla, who is seen walking alone fearlessly, and this sight makes her wonder if it's okay to leave the child unattended. While observing both of them, Rosen realizes just how much Layla resembles her uncle Henry. With that in mind, she turns to Henry and casually mentions that his niece is cute, but this unexpected comment takes him by surprise. Inquisitively, he asks her how she knows his niece. The tension in his voice and behavior hints at a certain unease he feels about Rosen's knowledge of his little niece. In response to his fear, Rosen questions whether he believes she can do anything with the handcuffs on her. However, he misconstrues her curiosity, suspecting her to be a witch, despite the denials of others. Henry forewarns her that she's about to reveal her witchcraft and sternly warns her against harming Layla. Moments later, in a rather fascinating turn of events, Henry notices a sudden change in Layla's behavior and urgently screams her name. It appears that the child is choking on something she was eating, given the way she's holding her neck. Panic sets in, and Rosen immediately begins screaming for help, then quickly checks herself as she realizes that there's no doctor on board the ship. Desperate, she pleads with Henry to release her right away, assuring him that she knows how to help, and without hesitation, he releases her, and she rushes to Layla's side to save her. At that moment, the commotion attracts the attention of others from nearby rooms, and they rush out to see what's happening. They witness Rosen's heroic efforts in saving the child. After successfully rescuing Layla, Rosen embraces the crying child, overwhelmed with the realization that she was able to save her. Henry snaps out of the state of shock he was in and rushes towards Layla, inquiring if she's okay. Meanwhile, a lady who came out after hearing all the noise said she wasn't able to see clearly, but she saw a woman holding onto a little girl and giving her first aid, and it also seemed like the little girl had something stuck in her throat. On the other hand, Rosen discovers that it was because of a tiny piece of candy that Layla was almost losing her life. So, she comes to the conclusion that a single bullet and a single piece of candy can both end the life of a person. It's not just soldiers who can end the lives of people and save them. While sitting on the ground, she asks Henry how her skills were and if they were useful. She even says that if he's thankful for her actions, then at least he should give her some water to wash herself off with. Alternatively, he could sneak in a lot of food for her in her prison cell, without his superiors knowing. After talking, she notices there's no response from him, but as she's just about to make another request, the commander replies, saying he'll fulfill all that she has requested. However, she didn't know that he has been the one she has been talking to all along. She looks up to him, her curiosity evident, and asks him why he's there. But before he could say a word, the captain strides into the room to check on his granddaughter, Layla. Realizing the presence of the captain, Rosen quickly minces her words, saying she was just joking when she made those earlier remarks. She emphasizes that she wasn't particularly hoping for anything in return for her heroic actions to save the child. The commander tells her that it's not difficult to reward her with the things she had asked for. He adds that the Empire's army always ensures that individuals are compensated for their deeds, even if they are prisoners destined for imprisonment on Monty Island. They follow the same principle. Rosen, caught off guard, asks him if he's truly going to allow her to wash up, seeking confirmation. He affirms this, but mentions that she will still have to be cuffed while doing so. She questions the possibility of washing herself with cuffs on, perplexed by the idea. The commander reassures her, promising to arrange for a servant to assist her. He even teases her, suggesting that in another life, she might have been a princess. As the commander continues the task of fixing the chain securely back onto her wrist, the captain raises his voice, loudly calling out Commander Kerner's name and obviously cursing at him for subjecting Layla's savior to such cruel treatment. He pleads with the commander to release Rosen, even if it is only for a brief moment. He points out that they are already surrounded by the sea, making the need for restraints seem unnecessary. However, the commander remains steadfast in his decision to keep her in chains. For Rosen, this scene takes on an unexpectedly entertaining quality as she stands there, an intrigued observer, watching the heated argument between the commander and the captain over her fate. The argument continues for some time, with Commander Kerner refusing to yield to the captain's request. Eventually, the captain realizes that his appeals have fallen on deaf ears. He turns to Rosen and addressing her as Lady Howards, he pleads with her to forgive the commander's discourtesy and graciously accept the gratitude of an old man like himself. Leaning closer, he admits that he forgot to introduce himself and begins by revealing that he is now retired, but once held the prestigious position of an admiral in the Navy. In a not-so-modest manner, he asserts that she must have heard of Alex Leeville, and her memory is immediately jogged. She recalls the name from the renowned masterpiece in the imperial capital, the statue of Alex Leeville marching towards the enemy. She acknowledges that there's no way she could have remained unaware of such a prominent figure. Clearing her throat, she begins by setting the record straight, asserting that she is neither a lady nor a Howards. She introduces herself as Rosen Walker. The captain then reveals that Layla is his one and only granddaughter, and without Rosen's timely intervention, he might have lost his beloved grandchild. Noting Rosen's desire for cleanliness and food, he offers to provide her with a meal, though she'll prefer it in her prison cell, also adding a subtle request for meat. However, the captain firmly insists that he cannot treat his granddaughter's savior in such a manner, as it goes against the principles of the Leeville family's honor. He adds that their sense of honor simply won't allow such an occurrence. Concluding his speech, he warmly invites Rosen to join them for dinner if she has no prior plans for the following day. Rosen's already dreading the upcoming dinner, and the idea of attending it is making her anxious. The captain wants her at the dinner, but he assures her she doesn't have to come if it's too much for her. Just then, Commander Kerner chimes in, suggesting that the captain's offer is too generous for a prisoner. Rosen senses the commander might launch into a hateful speech. She quickly accepts the captain's invitation, explaining that she's always hungry and can eat even with her hands shackled. The commander acknowledges the possibility of her trying to escape, but she reassures him that she won't run away, recalling his teachings about sea creatures. During a tense silence, their eyes meet, and a memory of her past fantasies about Kerner flashes in her mind. She realizes life keeps pushing her in unwanted directions. The next day, she wakes up in a luxurious room, free from her shackles. She's uncertain about her surroundings, but is soon greeted by three ladies named Michaela, Louise, and Maya. They offer to help her freshen up, taking her to a bath. As she relaxes in the warm water, she reflects on how this place feels like heaven. She remembers accepting the captain's dinner invitation and being guided to the princess's room. While getting bathed, she ponders the luxury of this place compared to her grim past. A little while later, Rosen emerges from her bath, wrapped in just a towel. Henry is there, and she approaches him, asking if he has something to say. He confirms and requests a private conversation, stressing its confidentiality. The maids suggest waiting until Rosen is dressed, but he insists it's Commander Kerner's urgent order to deliver the message. Rosen questions if he plans a body search now that the maids are gone. Henry denies it, assuring her and explaining he'll deliver a single message and leave. She remains skeptical, doubting the logic of a lieutenant being assigned as her aide while she's in the bath, hinting at ulterior motives. She demands he share any additional information immediately. Henry begins to explain it's about Layla, but Rosen interrupts, asking if the child is okay. He reassures her and reveals that Layla was checked by a doctor and is fine. Curious, she inquires why he was so scared during the incident with Layla, and he explains that he's related to Layla's parents, his older sister and her husband. As the conversation continues, he also inquires if she knew about the bombing in Riorton. She instantly denies any knowledge of it, explaining that it's in her past now, and because that day, she was on her first escape. Henry proceeds to reveal that on the day of the bombing, his sister was there, along with Layla. However, at that time, his cute little niece was just a newborn baby. He continues to share his experiences about his sister and the bombing, although Rosen feels it has nothing to do with her and doesn't want to know the details. Henry continues his narrative, explaining that on that fateful day, they spotted an enemy squadron in the air during their flight. The squadron was divided into two, with one heading towards Malona and the other towards Riorton. Faced with this dilemma, the commander had to make a choice, which was to save Malona. Despite surviving the war, he realized that something in his head was broken as soon as the war ended. He firmly agrees with her words, stating that he's no longer the same person and can't be called a pilot anymore, although he's grateful that Layla is present with him. After hearing everything he shared, she bravely asks him if he resents her for surviving as a prisoner from Riorton while his innocent sister lost her life in the city. It appears to be quite the opposite from what we can observe. He has come to apologize to her for his earlier behavior, acknowledging that he acted as a troublemaker or showed her a monstrous side while throwing fish into the sea. He goes on to mention that if it weren't for her intervention, Layla wouldn't have been saved, and he expresses his heartfelt gratitude for rescuing his little niece. Meanwhile, the maids waiting outside the room are torn between their curiosity and their obedience to Commander Kerner's orders. Despite their inner desire to peek inside, they ultimately have no choice but to follow the commander's directive to leave the two of them alone. Yet, the temptation to take a quick look still lingers. Suddenly, Commander Kerner makes an appearance, striding toward the room. In a playful and teasing manner, Rosen turns to Henry and questions the sincerity of his words, asking if they are just empty expressions. Henry, not wanting to ruin the mood, earnestly reassures her that he genuinely appreciates her. However, Rosen isn't content with mere words of gratitude. She wants him to prove his sincerity by giving up the keys to the chains that have been used on her. With a few words designed to play on Henry's mind, Rosen manages to persuade him into agreeing. He remarks that it's not like she'd survive even if she had a lifeboat. She then signals for him to come closer and whispers something into his ear. The two continue to argue about what she said when suddenly, the commander bursts into the room, catching them in an extremely awkward situation. Seeing Henry standing so close to Rosen, with a towel involved, must have triggered some dark thoughts in the commander's mind. His anger is obvious as he demands an explanation from his subordinate about their activities. Henry, overwhelmed with fear, stammers continuously, prompting the commander to order him out of the room before shutting the door. Once alone with Rosen, the commander steps back and motions for her to take a seat. After a moment of silence, he begins to inquire about Henry's behavior toward her earlier. He even offers to change the surveillance to another person for her journey to Monty Island and assures her that he will prevent Henry from coming near her. Rosen, surprised by the commander's willingness to accommodate her, pauses for a moment and questions whether the person in question isn't his own lieutenant. The commander responds with determination, stating that if Henry violated her trust, then he is no longer his lieutenant. She takes a moment to remind him that she's the Witch of Al-Kafez, and he's a war hero. Henry Leeville is supposed to be on his side. However, he looks at her clearly unable to understand her point, so she then asks him if he doesn't trust his subordinates. This results in him expressing his hate for these kinds of issues. He explains that people are three-dimensional, and just because Henry is a good subordinate doesn't mean he is without flaws. Out of curiosity, Commander Kerner asks her if nothing really happened. She responds by saying that she and Henry were just talking about Layla, and he was embarrassed to express his thanks in front of others. That's why they were the only ones present in the room. Then she smiles and asks what a prisoner could possibly get from a guard. To her surprise, the commander says he doesn't know how everyone was fooled by her lies all this time. He adds that it's evident she's only interested in opportunities like that, and it's still the same now if you look closely. In her defense, she says it's not that everyone fell for her lies, but they pretended to be fooled and it doesn't matter whether she's good at lying or not. So she's just saying what she wants to say, because no matter what she says, nothing is going to change. She still acknowledges with a smile that he's definitely a hero, and it's very righteous of him to care so much about a prisoner like her. He, in response, asks her if she thinks he's a hero too. Surprised by the commander's question, Rosen asks him if it is strange for someone like her to admire a hero. Just as he's about to answer, she reveals that she liked him too because she was a citizen of the Empire. When his pictures fell from the sky, she picked them up and collected them one by one, this revelation causing the commander to flinch. Rosen notices this and tells him that he should know already that it's because he's handsome. She says this with a bright smile on her face, but then it dawns on her that she's just bluffing and shouldn't be saying this. While wondering why she's saying all of this all of a sudden, she finally permits him to leave as there is no need to keep him there anymore. As he stands up to leave, he informs her that he'll send the attendants back in. On the other hand, Rosen tells him that she'll put the handcuffs back on after getting dressed, but if he's really concerned that she'll escape, he can leave the door slightly open for Henry outside and instruct him to turn around. While she's still talking, the commander stretches forth his hand, seemingly offering to help her get up. He says he's not in a bad mood, but he's just bewildered by what she said earlier. He admits that they might have something in common. While still stretching forth his hand to her, he says she needs to get dressed because the dinner she requested is waiting for her. Before she can make a statement, he suddenly lifts her up, causing her to question if she's a piece of baggage. So she tells him that there's no need for this and he should just let the attendants in. But he's still filled with doubts about her, and he even says it was a mistake to follow the captain's instructions in the first place. Still struggling, she says all he has to do is tell Henry to keep watch since he doesn't trust her. However, the commander says he doesn't trust Henry anymore, so on that note, he decides to keep watch over her himself. He mentions that amongst the captain, the attendants, Henry Leeville, and Layla Leeville, the only person who hasn't let their guard down around her is him. Rosen then asks if that's because he's afraid of her and the fact that she would escape. He responds, saying he's afraid of her, which makes her wonder why he should be afraid of her when he's the one who has the upper hand in this situation. So, he walks out with a cigarette in his hand, thinking to himself. Then he notices the report that Henry brought on the table, which he clearly instructed someone to burn. He states that the newspaper was initially just a pastime, but after the war, he had the same dream every night. It was a nightmare where he was being dragged into pitch-black waters, and once he woke up from a nightmare, he couldn't go back to sleep. Every time this happened, he would open the newspaper and blindly read through the words without grasping the meaning behind them. For every time he read through the words, his eyes stopped at the word Rierton, as it is the city which was ruined by his choices. He notes that there was no mention of his name in the article. Instead, it mentioned a witch, falsely created by the media, the government, and the military, who was the scapegoat replacing his name. Since that day, it's as though he's been bewitched by the witch's magic, and he's been relentlessly pursuing the name of Rosen. In reality, Rosen seems to be a mirror image of himself, plagued by incredibly bad luck. Countless thoughts race through his mind, drawing strange parallels between his own life and that of the prisoner. He even begins to self-reflect and blame himself for certain aspects of the situation. However, his thoughts are abruptly interrupted when Layla enters the room, her small hands clutching an assortment of toys. The commander inquires about the purpose of the toys, and she explains that they are a present she intends to give to Rosen later in the evening, though she's uncertain of her preferences. As a result, she's brought them to Commander Ian Kerner, under the belief that he might have insights into Rosen's likes and dislikes. As the conversation continues, her eyes land on a newspaper lying on his desk, and she mentions that the attendant had attempted to dispose of it on a previous occasion. She informed the attendant not to do so, because it belongs to the commander. Intrigued and somewhat taken aback, Commander Kerner questions Layla about when she became aware of this fact. The young girl responds by asking if it isn't a common trend nowadays to collect articles related to Rosen. She goes on to mention that she had been searching for a newspaper to use in making a scrapbook, but found that all the articles about Rosen in the newspapers that were discarded had been carefully cut out. It's clear that Layla possesses a kind and considerate nature. Feeling a sense of frustration and unease, the commander beckons her closer and discreetly asks if she has shared this information with anyone else. Layla assures him that she hasn't breathed a word to anyone, not even her uncle. With a heavy sigh, he implores her to promise that she will keep this secret in the future. Curious, she asks if he will get into trouble if others discover the truth. He explains that it would indeed be problematic if the truth were to come to light, as he is the person responsible for transporting the prisoners. Left with little choice, Layla agrees to promise not to disclose the information, as she does not wish to cause any trouble for the commander. So, she tells him that he doesn't have to worry because everyone thinks that he hates Rosen. But he corrects the notion, saying that he doesn't particularly hate the prisoner, just that this is his job, and he cannot have those kinds of feelings. On top of that, the prisoner also saved her. So, even if he was rude before, he won't be like that anymore. Surprisingly, the little girl asks if he likes the prisoner, but he responds by saying he neither hates nor likes her. The cute Layla seeks permission to like Rosen from him, stating that she's someone who takes a person's life, and she also saved hers too. With this calculation of hers, she comes to the conclusion that she can like the prisoner, and then, she asks him again to choose which of her toys Rosen likes. He finally picks the teddy bear, and Layla reveals that she also has something to give him. Then she passes the coin previously given to her by the prisoner to him, saying it's the coin of luck, and good things will come if he keeps it. Furthermore, she says she feels he needs it more than her, because he always didn't have a good night's sleep. He inquires where she got the coin from and warns her not to take it from anywhere next time. However, he still thanks the little child and promises to keep the coin well. Then he urges her to go back because it will be mealtime soon. On that note, she inquires if he knows where her uncle is, stating that he has to change his clothes too. The commander informs her that her uncle, Henry, is keeping watch for Rosen Walker and she's taking a bath right now. But Layla reveals that she saw him before, and this simply means that he's not in front of the door of Rosen's room. After this realization, he tries to calm himself and bury his feelings, because he already feels so mad. Much later, Henry can be seen explaining to the commander that he and Rosen only had a brief conversation earlier when he unexpectedly barged in on them. In the room where Rosen is dressing up, one of the maids, who deeply admires her outfit, encourages her to come out already, expressing certainty that everyone would be pleasantly surprised. Rosen, however, holds reservations, doubting that her presence alone would provoke such surprise. The maid, in response, questions if Rosen comprehends just how elegant and stunning she looks at this very moment. Rosen, though reluctantly, replies that she doubts anything significant would result from such excessive praise. After much persuasion from the maid, Rosen finally steps out of the room, leaving Henry and the commander in a state of shock due to her transformed appearance. As she emerges from the room, she wonders why both men are gazing at her with their mouths shut. Suddenly, Henry breaks the silence, inquiring about her identity, as he apparently failed to recognize her after the remarkable transformation. Rosen observes that both men are wearing outfits that deviate from their usual attire, leading her to speculate whether they dressed up because the captain is also present. Following this, Henry extends his hand towards her, offering to escort her. However, her surprise prompts her to question if he's merely acting up or teasing her, anticipating that he might push her away afterwards. Yet, upon closer examination, she realizes that he possesses a considerable amount of attractiveness, even if he isn't her typical type of guy. The commander abruptly interrupts their moment, sternly informing Henry that he is strictly prohibited from approaching Rosen Walker within a 1-meter radius. The motive behind this order is obviously rooted in jealousy. This unexpected turn of events prompts Henry to question the commander, inquiring if the previous misunderstanding had not been resolved. In response, the commander conveys that, indeed, the misunderstanding had been addressed, but he harbors a lingering sense of mistrust towards Henry. Curiosity overtakes Henry, and he seeks to understand the commander's reason. The commander offers a cryptic explanation, stating that he once told Henry that excessive favor or excessive hostility are equally dangerous. His underlying concern appears to be that Henry has been enjoying the company of Rosen Walker a bit too much. The innocent Henry presses the commander further, inquiring whether he cannot be trusted and whether the commander believes he might defy the order and release the prisoner. In response, Commander Kerner confesses that he remains uncertain about the true nature of their interactions in the bathroom. Henry explains that the only thing Rosen had requested in the bathroom was the meal menu, as she had a particular craving. She had simply asked Henry to relay her request to the chef separately. Seeking verification, Commander Kerner asks the prisoner and she confirms Henry's story, even commending his honesty. As their discussion continues, the captain and his granddaughter make their entrance. The little girl expresses excitement at Rosen's gracious acceptance of their invitation. Rosen appears genuinely excited about the little girl too, and Layla compliments her, mentioning how she looks like a princess and is incredibly pretty. With a warm, appreciative smile on her face, Rosen returns the compliment to Layla. Suddenly, the commander orders the little girl to step back from the prisoner, insisting that she can express her gratitude from a bit of a distance. Isn't that quite a mean-spirited behavior? While contemplating this in her mind, Rosen takes note of the commander's ruthless behavior, even when dealing with children. She reflects that the only person who might be able to oppose him aboard the ship is the captain. The captain extends his apologies to Rosen and assures her that the meal will be ready soon. She then suggests that it would be nice if her handcuffs could be removed during mealtime. The captain, however, explains that he cannot personally remove them and asks Henry to assist her with her meal. Unfortunately, Henry seems unable to help and suggests he ask one of the attendants for assistance. Seeing the situation, the commander intervenes, claiming that since Henry can't do it, he will help Rosen during the meal. He reaches out to her and asks if she has any objections to his offer, all the while holding her hand. Strangely, Rosen notices that the commander's gaze feels different from the first encounter. She inwardly thinks that his gray eyes seem to be fixated on her more intensely, maybe even sharing some similarity, as he previously mentioned. It's possible that all of this is just a sweet delusion, a way to escape the harsh reality. However, the more she gazes into those gray eyes, the more she becomes oddly irritated. Rosen observes that his gaze doesn't possess the fiery heat of red or the icy chill of blue, but is a difficult color that defies easy classification. She ponders the true meaning behind those enigmatic eyes, even though there's no necessity for her to do so. However, she quickly realizes that if she disregards his vile side, all that remains is potential destruction. Shaking herself from her thoughts, she asks him when he intends to release her hand. As Rosen utters these words, the commander swiftly retracts his hand, explaining that he had been attempting to pull the chain. However, the captain remains skeptical, no longer believing a word he says. To prove his sincerity, he repeats to Rosen that he genuinely believed it was the chain, a fact she claims to know. In her own mind, she acknowledges that it doesn't carry any significant meaning, everything appears to be a product of her delusion and misunderstanding. Suddenly, a memory from her past rushes into her mind, a vivid recollection that felt more like a fantasy than a delusion. In this memory, she one-sidedly loved him as far back as her memory can reach, dwelling in her own personal fantasy. She berates herself, cursing her lack of composure in such a moment. Despite her inner turmoil, she cannot bring herself to meet Commander Kerner's gaze. Meanwhile, Commander Kerner persists in his attempts to convince her that he had no intention of holding her hand. Yet, her attention wanders back to her thoughts, where she tells herself that he should not make it obvious that he's feeling offended, as it's as if he had read her mind after all. In that moment, she recalls a promise of protection made to her in the past, and she asserts that she can no longer be deceived by that type of lie. As they arrive at the dining room, Rosen exclaims in surprise and offers an apology to the captain for displaying such an attitude. The captain, however, reassures her that it's perfectly fine and notes the luxury of the setting, acknowledging that he rarely partakes in such luxurious meals. He further explains that formal dinners are usually conducted this way, though the current circumstances are somewhat exceptional. As Rosen takes her seat, she can't help but observe that no one in the room is dressed as extravagantly as she is. Subsequently, her plate of food is served, and just as she's about to dig in, Henry inquires whether she intends to eat with her bare hands, all while her hands remain handcuffed. He also points out that the captain has not given the signal to start eating. This takes Rosen by surprise, and she questions if the captain had signaled them to begin eating earlier. Henry clarifies that there's a distinction between the captain offering them to eat and them being allowed to start. Besides, at the moment, only soup is being served, so she must wait until the entire meal is served. He also asks how she managed to eat prior to this situation. Deep down, Rosen admits she has never experienced such a luxurious meal before and wonders why Henry is suddenly treating her with such nobility, despite knowing she doesn't quite fit into this setting. At this moment, Commander Kerner calls her name with a spoonful of food aimed at feeding her. Layla, on the other hand, remarks on the seemingly friendly interaction between Rosen and the commander. So, the commander suddenly recalls Henry's lack of concern for etiquette on the battlefield, and he immediately explains that this situation is different. He's not trying to embarrass Rosen Walker. The commander then instructs Henry to remain silent and move away, reminding him of the prohibition against being within a 1-meter radius of the prisoner, which means he can't sit at the table. As the commander continues to feed Rosen, he notices something peculiar. She appears rugged, yet her touch is surprisingly delicate. Rosen seems to enjoy the food so much that she keeps ordering various dishes, leaving the rest of the people at the table in shock. However, the commander advises her to eat slowly to avoid an upset stomach, adding that eating hastily might lead to more significant losses if she ends up throwing up. Noticing the commander's facial expression, Rosen interrupts and inquires about why he's frowning, to which he candidly responds that his face naturally looks that way. One thing continues to perplex Rosen, the fact that the commander engages in conversation with her, even though she was the one who initiated the initial confrontation, and he isn't ignoring her as he typically does. Moving on, he asks her if she's a nurse, and when she responds negatively, he questions where she acquired her knowledge of first aid, as such skills are rare in the entire country. Out of curiosity, he probes further, asking if she ever used magic to save Layla. With a cunning smile, she remarks that when a woman accomplishes remarkable deeds, people often label her a witch, but she's far from being a nurse. Instead, she learned by observing her husband, Hindley, who was a doctor, although an unlicensed one. She swiftly recollects that it was her husband, Hindley, who had a real witch as his wife, though she herself is not a witch. It's his other wife, Emily, who possesses those supernatural abilities. After revealing this, the table is suddenly filled with an awkward silence. Rosen wonders if it's because they suddenly realize that she's a murderer. The captain, in an unexpected turn of events, draws her attention by inquiring about her age. He further adds that what every newspaper publishes is based on their own belief, and some tabloids have gone as far as suggesting she hides her 70s age through magic. In response, she confidently asserts that what was published in the Imperial newspaper is true, and she's merely 25 years old. The inquisitive captain questions her again, this time inquiring about the age at which she got married. When she gives her reply, he comments that she married quite early and asks if it was her parents' decision. However, she affirms negatively, revealing that she's an orphan. Surprisingly, Henry slams the table, his voice filled with anger, exclaiming that a mere 25-year-old got married. He also asks how old her husband was at the time. This sudden fury is puzzling to those at the table, especially considering her husband is deceased. Commander Kerner intervenes, telling them both to cease discussing irrelevant matters and concentrate on their food. He also cautions them about the presence of a little child at the table. Despite this, Layla insists that it's fine to talk about it because she, too, saw the newspaper article that stated Rosen was responsible for ending her husband's life. The commander warns the little child to stop talking, but she ignores him and continues, suggesting that it's possible Rosen didn't commit the crime she's accused of. The commander attempts to convince her that the prisoner is guilty and has already been convicted, but the innocent child believes otherwise simply because Rosen has claimed innocence. Then she poses a question, why does no one listen to Rosen? The commander replies, saying it's because what she's accused of is not a lie. He adds that it's true that Layla owes her life to Rosen, but it's also an undeniable truth that Rosen ended her husband's life. With tears in her eyes, Layla says that it's still too much and that if no one believes her like they do for Rosen, she'll be very sad. Rosen, feeling sorry for the innocent child, approaches the commander and kindly requests that he cease pressuring her, reassuring him that she will just eat quietly. As if that was not enough, the commander raises the issue of the coin, inquiring why she gave it to Layla. She clarifies that the coin wasn't hers initially, it belonged to Layla. She only borrowed it for a moment as a joke and promptly returned it to its rightful owner. Rosen discerns the commander's underlying motive in questioning her about the coin. He seeks to scrutinize her previous falsehoods, attempting to confirm her reputation as a liar. Little Layla interjects, defending Rosen, asserting that the coin is a talisman of good fortune. Meanwhile, Rosen regards children's innocence as a tool she can use to her advantage. What a cunning young lady she is. As time progresses, a maid approaches Rosen, inquiring whether she can clear the empty plates and serve the next course. Rosen consents, her curiosity increases about the grand feast that will come next. Commander Kerner, noticing Rosen's patience, asks if there is a particular dish among those on the table that she would like to have, to which she responds, Maria Berry. The commander obliges, and serves her the requested dish. As Rosen begins to eat, Commander Kerner is about to make a statement, but he suddenly notices drops of blood all over her, even from her mouth. Tension mounts as those present are confused, fearing she might be bleeding profusely. Little do they know that this is all part of Rosen's scheme to avoid returning to prison. She is determined to save herself, even if it means inflicting harm upon herself, all to manipulate Kerner into letting his guard down, if only for a moment. She falls to the ground with a loud thud and passes out. The commander immediately carries her to the bed and then questions one of the attendants about who poisoned the food. He notes that Rosen vomited blood as soon as she ate the fruit, but the attendant explains that it happened because of the fruit, not because the fruit is poisoned. The attendant says he rushed over because the commander made a fuss about an attempted poisoning incident. However, it seems Commander Kerner is the only one who's in his right mind right now. So, the commander asks the attendant what they used in the food if not poison, and he responds by saying they didn't put anything in the food. It's just that Rosen has a unique constitution that reacts to certain foods. Furthermore, he explains that it's not poisoning but a food poisoning incident, then he asks if the people who ate with her are all fine. Next, the commander asks him if he means that Rosen knowingly ate the food herself, and he replies, saying that if she didn't know, then it's an accident, but if she did know, then it's self-harm, or it could possibly be an attempt at her own life. The commander says it's common, after all, she's a prisoner going to Monty Island. So, it's better to end her life like this than to arrive at the island. He asks if she's going to lose her life then, and the attendant affirms negatively. He says the treatment is done, and she's just sleeping now. However, she's still unconscious because her body has weakened a lot due to a lack of nutrition, so it's hard to get up once she collapses because her stamina is low. The commander, still inquisitive about whether Rosen will lose her life or not, continues to question the attendant. Just then, Layla asks Commander Kerner if he's going to put Rosen back in jail. She starts crying and says that if she is already so sick and sent back to prison, she'll get worse and lose her life. She even holds him by the trouser, begging him to let the prisoner rest a little longer before sending her back. So, the commander orders the attendant to move Rosen to his cabin because he intends to monitor her himself, following the previous instructions of his superior. He says this is a very personal feeling that he couldn't figure out. He tried to shake it off out of fear, but it didn't work. He's bothered about the fact that he's worried about her even when he's the one who's going to drag her down to an afterlife worse than death. Chapter 17 ends. A similar scenario involving Rosen from the past comes to mind, and it was when she discovered that the Maria berry is poisonous to her. She recalls that Emily had informed her of the berry's name to ensure she would avoid it. Yet, every time her life plunges into misery to the point of being unbearable, the name of that deadly berry resurfaces in her mind. She awakens suddenly, her eyes clouded with gloom, staring into the empty air. After a moment, she jerks herself upright, confused by her surroundings, only to realize that the chains on her wrists still bind her. However, she is determined not to return to the confines of a prison, considering the hassle worth it. Notably, her clothes have been changed. Nevertheless, she asserts that she cannot endure this again, as her body feels like it's burning, and she worries about Layla's well-being. Just then, the captain enters the room, inquiring about her well-being, imploring her to rest properly, emphasizing the importance of good health and absolute bed rest. He questions whether she'd like to know how far they are from reaching Monty Island, explaining that they will arrive in 3 days. He mentions that they continue to sail westward, defying the wind, thanks to the invention of the steam engine, which makes it easier to sail against the wind. The captain praises the youngsters who conquered gravity and soared into the sky, asking for Rosen's thoughts on that side of them. Curiously, she inquires if she is in the captain's cabin, to which he responds that it is Commander Kerner's cabin. He reveals that he often pretends to yield to the commander's stubbornness, adding that Commander Kerner is currently outside smoking. Rosen expresses her belief that pilots should not smoke, but the captain reminds her that the war has already ended. Their conversation continues, and the captain reveals that Commander Kerner may seem blunt but is not heartless. He starts showing Rosen some gifts he presented to the commander when he was much younger, which the commander still cherishes to this day. The captain notes that Commander Kerner is actually warm-hearted, despite his pretense of being otherwise. To further enlighten Rosen, he presents a map that they are using to navigate their journey, mentioning that this gift is almost 15 years old. The captain shares insights into the commander's private life, even revealing that he and Henry attended the military academy together. He discloses that Commander Kerner has been in the military academy since the age of 10, and he has known him since childhood. With all she has learned, Rosen assumes that the commander and Henry must be close, but the captain corrects her assumption. Rosen speculates that Commander Kerner must have grown up in a loving, prosperous household, imagining a grand mansion, kind parents, a vast garden, numerous servants, butlers, and a team of chefs, a picture-perfect family as seen in drawings. She believes he was raised like this due to his behavior. Surprisingly, the captain reveals that Commander Kerner lost both of his parents at a very young age. Furthermore, the captain reveals that Kerner's parents passed away from an infectious disease when he was very young. He shares that he had to move frequently from one relative's house to another, thanks to an inheritance. However, as soon as he grew older, he made the hard decision to enter the military academy. We also learn that the commander is a person of few emotions, unable to be honest with himself. Tragically, he endures all of this alone. After all these revelations, the captain implores Rosen not to contemplate taking her own life. From this statement, it becomes evident that he misunderstood her reasons for making an attempt at her own life. He goes on to share that he also has a daughter, frequently on his mind, who bears striking similarities to Rosen. He continues, revealing that she is the first child he had after 15 years of marriage. Her late arrival and early departure is a heartbreaking one. After this brief reflection on his daughter, he inquires about Rosen's well-being and whether she is feeling any better. Noticing her less than rosy complexion, he suggests that she take some more rest. He reminds her that they still have some time until they reach Monty Island and encourages her to see him as someone who never gives up on her. In her private thoughts, she acknowledges the captain's attempts to explain the wind direction, temperature, and weather, even though her understanding remains somewhat limited due to her shallow knowledge. One thing, however, is crystal clear to her: she must head east. Much later, as she lies down, lost in thought, she tells herself that she must find the key and steal it from Commander Kerner, no matter what, even if it means having to steal the gun as well. Immersed in her contemplations, she recalls the day she first found courage, considering it the brightest moment in her seemingly worthless life. Every time she reflects on that moment, she experiences a sensation akin to a blazing blue flame surging in her heart. That flame gradually melts away her frozen fears, empowering her to rise and soar once more. Filled with newfound confidence, she firmly asserts that she will never suffer defeat again, regardless of the beings she may face. Suddenly, Commander Kerner enters the room, and she inquires about his whereabouts, wondering why he only returns now after a considerable wait. He responds, explaining that he had been stationed outside the cabin the entire time. Curious, she questions whether he typically avoids leaving such tasks to his subordinates, to which he reveals that the minister himself directly ordered him to oversee her transport, citing that Rosen underestimates her reputation despite her greater popularity. On the other hand, she insists that her reputation is more evil than his. With their meal concluded, she raises the question of whether she will be returning to the prison once again. In response, Commander Kerner suggests that she may stay in his cabin until they reach the island. Additionally, he mentions that the doctor has informed him of her health issues. She then inquires where he will reside if she occupies his cabin. Suspicious of her intentions, Commander Kerner speculates that she may have ulterior motives for proposing he acquire another cabin, believing she intends to use the opportunity to escape. Rosen starts to wonder if Commander Kerner can genuinely read minds, and she notices that the key on his waist has disappeared, indicating that the commander is not as unintelligent as she thought. Consequently, she offers to sleep on the sofa while he takes the bed, but he refuses, claiming that the sofa is lighter than the bed. This statement hints at her potentially using the sofa to attempt an escape into the ocean. Commander Kerner points out her previous attempt to end her life, emphasizing that there's no guarantee she won't try it again. Therefore, he decides to confine her to the room. Despite her attempts to explain that she didn't actually attempt to take her own life, Commander Kerner interrupts, asserting that she requested the berry from Henry, fully aware of the risks involved, and convinced that she may lose her life by consuming it. He is furious that he was compelled to feed her the berry with his own hands. Wondering if he's angry, Rosen reflects on her observations of the commander over the past few days. He's not the kind of person who easily becomes agitated or shouts, and if he thinks about it wisely, he should have known that she would never make an attempt at her life. Therefore, she must not lose this opportunity where he's in this mood for once. So, she starts crying and saying that she'll lose her life before they arrive there, and even if she lives, she would just pass away after being tortured or subjected to hard labor. She says all these with hopes of gaining pity from him, but he obviously seems unbothered. He grabs her by the chin and asks if she thinks things will work out as she wants. He even warns her that if she thinks of doing anything funny, he'll bind her limbs on the bed completely. Throwing several threats at her, he looks at her and says he doesn't understand her. The same person who escaped from prison so desperately, he doesn't seem to understand why she's trying to take her life after all this time. She responds, saying it's because she can't escape. There's only the ocean and threats everywhere, and besides, he's the one who scared and lectured her in front of the monsters. The commander still insists that he really warned her, but he didn't think that she would try to take her own life, and the Rosen he knows is not someone who will give up until her last breath. Reminiscing on his exact words, "You whom I know," she asks him if he knows her, and if he does, how much does he know? She repeats the question again, but this time around, daring him to say that he knows her. Noticing her behavior, he urges her not to get mad and says that he doesn't know her, but he certainly knows a lot more than what she thought. Then, she asks him if he thinks he knows her just because he read a scrap of newspapers, but surprisingly, he admits that he did read about her in the newspaper. So, she tells him to explain what she can understand and say what he's trying to tell her directly. The only thing he says afterwards is that she shouldn't pass away. He tells her to promise him that she wouldn't take her life and that she'd stay quietly while she's on the ship. Unable to understand why he's asking for such from her, she asks him if he's telling her to give up on the last method to screw him up. Then, he mentions that he knows Rosen will still pass away because there's no way she can endure for a long time at Monty Island, but that doesn't mean she can escape too. So, he decides to make a deal that will not be a loss to her also. To her surprise, he starts taking off the chains from her wrists and ankles, and then he says he will release the chain when he's watching her. Although it's not for a long time, she will be able to sleep comfortably, and she can also eat properly. Also, he will give her time to look back on her life calmly until the journey ends. On that note, he tells her again to promise him that she won't end her life. Having to promise Commander Kerner that she won't commit suicide is a strange feeling for Rosen. To her, it sounds as if he doesn't want her to pass away. After much consideration, she finally makes the promise. She is aware that the ship has just 3 days to reach its destination, so she decides to savor what may be her last moments of freedom. Consequently, she boldly requests the strongest alcohol and some cigarettes, drawing a parallel to the tradition of allowing death row inmates to have a final meal. Commander Kerner complies, dipping his hand into his pocket and handing her a pack of cigarettes. He silently observes her as she lights one and takes a drag. After a brief pause, he informs her that he will bring the alcohol for her the next morning, and he offers her more cigarettes, given how quickly she is consuming them. In return, Rosen is overwhelmed with gratitude for having the opportunity to indulge in what she has desired for a long time. Despite this, she can't help but wonder about the commander's intentions for her once she's finished smoking. To avoid appearing suspicious, she contemplates what to say next. After careful consideration, she decides to inquire about Commander Kerner's smoking habits, highlighting her belief that pilots typically don't smoke. He defensively responds that he only smokes when the war ends, but she persists and asks when he started. Rosen believes that Commander Kerner is the embodiment of the sky itself, shining as brightly as the heavens. Every time the Imperial airplanes pass overhead, like a majestic flock of birds, she gazes upward at the boundless sky, knowing that Ian Kerner commands those aircraft. She's certain he's at the forefront, leading them into the great blue beyond. During those moments, if she stretches out both her arms and reaches for that small shape in the sky, she feels as if her earthly ties are momentarily separated, and she's soaring among the clouds. The outcome of the war becomes unimportant. All that matters to her is seeing him going across the endless blue sky. Back to the present, she turns to him and asks why he's still unmarried, even though the war has come to an end. He responds, saying that she appears to be inquisitive about many things, but she points out that she's not the only one with this curiosity. In fact, every fan of his in the entire empire wonders the same. He goes on to explain that being a pilot during the war meant living with the constant uncertainty of one's own mortality. Retrieving the remains of a fallen pilot from the battlefield was a difficult and often impossible task. This, he says, is why many of them chose not to start families. In his words, it seems as though no soldier could have contemplated marriage under those circumstances. Rosen, intrigued by his response, mentions that he fought in a war without carrying a picture of his lover inside his flight cap. At this, he smirks slightly and comments that while there may be many like him, not everyone makes such rash decisions. Their conversation continues for a while, but Rosen can't shake the image of that fleeting smile she just witnessed. She begins to think that he might be a bit less annoying than she initially assumed. In a different perspective, he expresses his belief that marriage is not a necessity. In response, she playfully says that if she were in his shoes, she would have considered having 3 wives. She confides that as she's lived her life, she's come to realize that she doesn't really need a man in her life. This, however, doesn't mean that she had a hand in her husband, Hindley's, demise. In the midst of their conversation, she reveals that she was her husband's second wife, a detail the commander probably wasn't aware of, as she hadn't shared it anywhere else. He suggests that it's time for her to go to bed, but she remains eager to share more about herself, offering to disclose a secret. She endeavors to entice the commander, all in the guise of sharing a secret. However, he promptly seizes her by the hand and conveys his lack of excitement, forcing her to retire to her bed. Her initial plan having failed, she makes a second attempt to engage him in a conversation. This time, she inquires whether it's acceptable for her not to be handcuffed again, to which he responds that he can simply handcuff her while she sleeps. She then asks if he plans to sleep soon, and he discloses that he rarely sleeps and can't sleep much either. It appears that Rosen was right all along, he always appeared fatigued. In a gesture of goodwill, he hands her the teddy bear that Layla had intended to give her as a gift. Upon hearing this, she embraces the teddy bear tightly and instructs him to convey her gratitude to Layla. The commander urges her once more to retire to bed in earnest, but she insists that she cannot fall asleep. She goes on to explain that she is destined to pass away, helpless, in 3 days, so she intends to make the most of her time awake. The commander advises her to hug the teddy bear and count the sheeps if she struggles to fall asleep. Her determination to share her secret still intact, she questions him again about his willingness to learn the truth. He responds that he already knows the truth and encourages her to sleep. Undiscouraged, she suddenly takes hold of his hand and insists that she will continue talking until she falls asleep, regardless of whether he listens or not. She begins by recounting that the story's interpretation can vary depending on who narrates it first. At this point, she states that at least one person can listen to her perspective. She remarks that it's up to him to believe or not, predicting that he won't believe it anyway, so nothing will change. She resolves to start her narrative from when she was 15 years old, as the events prior to that were exceedingly boring. She continues to say that her memories from 15 years ago are somewhat blurry. As she shares more details about her life back when she lived at the orphanage in Riorton, she reflects on how she couldn't escape that place for a whole 15 years. Moreover, since she was frequently subjected to punishment, she never really felt guilty for her supposed wrongdoings. According to her, the world within the orphanage meant everything to the young Rosen, but she had to work tirelessly, whether she was young or sick, simply because the threat of an angry hand or a broom being thrown at her hung over her head. It was undeniably difficult for her to survive, yet she harbors no pessimism towards life, acknowledging that this was the reality for everyone in that place. However, there was a brief period in her past when she caught a glimpse of what a more normal life could be like. Amidst all these reflections, she often wonders about the significance of the St. Valperga festival. Eventually, she uncovered the truth, the day when the St. Valperga festival was being celebrated, an annual festival night marking the birth of the greatest witch in history. She occasionally questions whether her life might have taken a different turn had she not witnessed that scene. Even though it may have been a bit dull and uneventful, the longing for a peaceful existence still lingers in her thoughts. Looks like the drama between Rosen and our dear Commander Kerner is just beginning. Want us to continue? Please comment Rosen below. And as always, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Until next time. Ciao.